Chapter 19, Section 4, 12, Diluvium. Irregular accumulations of clay, sand, and gravel, intermixed with broken chalk flints, are everywhere indiscriminately distributed over the surface of the country, and obscure the outcrops of the regular formations. These depositions are evidently composed of the ruin of the more ancient strata, and in all probability have been produced by that last catastrophe, by which the valleys have been excavated and the hills moulded into their present form. Of these deposits, the detritus of the chalk in a state of calcareous loam, broken flints, and gravel, constitute by far the most considerable portion, and so extensive is the destruction to which that formation has evidently been exposed, and so universally are its ruins distributed over the weald of Sussex, as to warrant the conclusion that it formerly extended very far beyond its present limits. On the summits of the downs, a layer of flints, slightly rolled, appears immediately beneath the turf, resting on an inconsiderable layer of chalk rubble. This bed contains rounded masses of chalk, crystallized carbonate of lime, ferruginous breccia, scoriaceous ironstone, a coarse grit containing angular fragments of quartz, and flattened oval pebbles of Druid sandstone. The flints are more or less broken, have suffered but little from attrition, and are so abundant as to form a constant supply for repairing the roads in the southeastern part of the county. This bed has clearly been formed by the destruction of the upper portion of the chalk, and it is equally evident that the cause which produced the ruin of the superior strata was as transient as it was powerful. Since, although the chalk in which the flints were embedded has been entirely destroyed, the latter have sustained but very little injury. Descending into the valleys, accumulations of chalk rubble and ochreous clay are again seen lying upon the bassetting edges of the solid strata, and the slopes of the hills are generally composed of similar materials. Examples of this kind occur in almost every locality of the South Downs. The gravel pits, as they are called, of Barkham, are part of a ridge of broken chalk flints, slightly rolled, resting upon a bed of ochreous clay. The flints are of various shades of yellow, brown, and carnelian. The color, which in all probability results partly from decomposition, and partly from an impregnation of metallic oxides, pervades the substance of the flint, but is much paler towards the center than on the surface. These flints are not reduced to the state of pebbles, much less of gravel, but are merely broken, and the sharpness of their angles worn away. At Isfield, Little Horsted, Barkham, Wellingham, etc., the surface of the weald clay, iron sand, and green sand is covered with beds of gravel, composed of water-worn fragments of sandstone and ironstone, which in some instances are consolidated into a coarse aggregate, and are evidently the detritus of the upper layers of the iron and green sand formations. A considerable bed of it occurs in the parish of Barkham, near the Anchor. At Hamsey, on the estate of the Reverend George Schiffner, and at Wellingham, near the seat of Mr. John Rickman. At Ringmer and Lawton Place, a layer of loam and ochreous clay is distributed over the surface of the blue chalk marl, and frequently contains belemnites and other organic remains that have been washed from the upper beds of that deposit. On the south side of the downs, to the northwest of Brighton, beds of loam, marl, and clay, with interspersions of gravel, constitute a flat, narrow tract of country that extends without interruption to Shoreham. But the most considerable and important deposit of diluvial detritus in Sussex is that forming the cliffs at Brighton, and which possesses characters so remarkable as to require particular notice. Brighton is situated on an immense accumulation of water-worn materials, which fills up a valley or hollow in the chalk. This diluvial deposit is bounded on the northwest by the South Downs. On the east it extends to Rottingdean, and is there terminated by the chalk. On the south it is washed by the sea, and forms a line of cliffs from 70 to 80 feet high. These exhibit a vertical section of the strata, and enable us to ascertain their nature and position. A vertical section of the cliffs, about half a mile east of Brighton, is represented in Tablet 4, Figure 1. The lowermost bed is 1. The upper or flinty chalk, which constitutes about 6 or 8 feet of the lower part of the cliff, and dipping southward, extends to an unknown distance into the sea. The continuation of the chalk behind the calcareous bed is marked former cliff in the sketch, and is introduced to show the relative situation of the masses, but without any regard to proportion. 2. Bed of fine sand from 3 to 4 feet. 3. Shingle bed from 5 to 8 feet. 4. Calcareous bed formed of the ruin of the chalk strata. With an intermixture of clay, it is provincially termed Coombe Rock, from 50 to 60 feet. The chalk presents its usual characters, and in various parts of its course is traversed by vertical and oblique veins of flint. The sand is very fine, varying from pure white to a light reddish-brown color. It disappears about a mile to the east of Brighton, where the succeeding deposit lies immediately upon the surface of the chalk. The shingle bed consists of pebbles formed, like the present beach, of broken chalk flints rounded by attrition. It contains also water-worn blocks of granite, porphyry, slate, limestone, and Druid sandstone. It occasionally envelopes masses of broken shells. The upper part of this bed is cemented together by calcareous spar, of a light yellow or amber color, forming a kind of breccia of a very singular appearance. The calcareous bed is composed of broken chalk, with angular fragments of flint, embedded in a calcareous mass of a yellowish color, constituting a very hard and coarse conglomerate. It is not stratified, but is merely a confused heap of alluvial materials. It varies considerably in its appearance and composition, in different parts of its course. In the inferior portion of the mass, the chalk is reduced to the state of small grains, which gradually become larger in proportion to their height in the cliff. At length fragments of flint appear, and these increase in size and number as they approach the upper part of the bed, of which they constitute the most considerable portion. These flints are more or less broken, and resemble those of our ploughed lands that have been long exposed to the action of the atmosphere. In some parts of the cliff, irregular masses occur of an extraordinary hardness. These have been produced by an infiltration of crystallized carbonate of lime. Large blocks of this variety may be seen on the shore, opposite to the New Stein, where they have for years resisted the action of the waves. This bed also contains water-worn blocks of Druid sandstone and ferruginous breccia, corresponding in every respect with those previously noticed in our description of the plastic clay formation. Small nodular masses, composed of carbonate of iron in lenticular crystals, interspersed with brown calcareous spar, have occasionally been found at the depth of 10 or 12 feet from the summit of the cliff. The only organic remains discovered in this deposit are the bones and teeth of the horse and of the Asiatic elephant. These occur but seldom and are more or less water-worn. The wells in the lower part of the town pass through the calcareous bed, shingle, and sand in succession. Upon reaching the chalk, springs of good water burst forth, and these are said to be influenced by the tides. Such are the leading features of these remarkable beds in the immediate vicinity of Brighton. In their course eastward towards Rottingdean, other characters are exhibited, which we shall now proceed to examine. About a mile to the east of Brighton, vertical veins of tabular flint traverse the chalk in an oblique direction, and terminate with the chalk immediately beneath the shingle bed. See Tablet 4, Figure 2. To avoid repetition, it may be proper in this place to remark that the veins of flint, so numerously distributed both horizontally and vertically throughout the chalk, are invariably confined to that formation, and in no instance whatever appear either in the shingle bed or in the calcareous bed above it. The shingle bed is perfectly horizontal and contains boulders of chalk, Druid sandstone, and ferruginous breccia. In the Coombe rock, the proportion of chalk is so great that the cliff at a distance assumes the appearance of a regular stratum, but upon closer examination it is evident that the chalk at some remote period has been broken and displaced, and having fallen upon the shingle previously to the formation of the calcareous bed, has subsequently been covered by that deposit. In Tablet 4, Figure 2, the chalk traversed by oblique veins of flint is seen forming the base of the cliff. The shingle bed succeeds, and immediately above it is a heap of chalk in a state of ruin. The latter is invested by the calcareous bed, of which the upper part of the cliff is composed. This appearance is curious, but the manner in which it has been produced is easily explained by a reference to those natural operations that still continue in full activity on our coasts. Were a bed of calcareous rubble to be deposited over the ruins of the chalk cliffs that are scattered along the shore, a collection of materials would be formed, corresponding in every respect with those above described, and a vertical section would exhibit an appearance precisely similar, namely a stratum of solid chalk at the base, then a layer of sand and of shingle, and lastly a heap of displaced chalk surrounded by calcareous diluvium. In corroboration of this opinion, it may also be remarked that while in general the variations observable in the color and composition of the calcareous bed are nearly horizontal, in the circumstances under discussion they are no longer conformable to the subjacent deposit, but rise over the heaps of chalk rubble, as in Tablet 4, Figure 2. These interspersions of pure chalk are frequent in other parts of the bed, but the present example is one of the most remarkable. Proceeding eastward at the distance of 2.5 miles from Brighton, the cliff is composed of the upper chalk, to the extent of 300 yards. This remarkable change in the structure of the cliff has evidently been occasioned, partly from the destruction of the diluvial deposits by the inroads of the sea, and partly from a projection of the chalk, which formed their ancient boundary. For there appears to have been but little correspondence in the sinuosities of the ancient and modern shores. An abrupt recess marks this alteration in the face of the cliff, and here the calcareous bed rises suddenly to the summit of the chalk, over which it is continued in a layer of inconsiderable thickness. See Tablet 5, Figure 1. The shingle bed, which at a short distance to the west contains large masses of chalk, here suffers a remarkable contraction, and is divided by thin seams of sand and fine rubble. At the curvature of the recess, the shingle diminishes very abruptly, and soon entirely disappears. Along the face of the chalk, slight traces of it are here and there perceptible, and in these situations the vertical flint veins that traverse the cliff invariably pass behind and are concealed from view by the insular patches of shingle. The face of the chalk is remarkably even. It is not, however, vertical, but forms a precipitous slope. In the upper part, the chalk is much broken and contains 2 horizontal veins of tabular flint. The inferior strata are more regular. It is particularly necessary for the reader to bear in mind that although the chalk with its horizontal flint veins, see Tablet 5, Figure 1, is higher than the insular portions of the shingle bed, it is not situated perpendicularly above them. The cliff, as before mentioned, forms an inclined plane, its summit receding considerably from the shore. Consequently, a vertical section would cut off all traces of the shingle. On the eastern extremity of the recess, the chalk is traversed by numerous veins of marl, but in other respects presents nothing worthy of observation. At the termination of the chalk, a bold projection of the cliff occurs, in which the shingle and calcareous bed appear in their usual position and proportions. Towards Rottingdean, the cliffs increase in altitude, but the calcareous bed diminishes considerably in thickness, and wherever a vertical section is exposed, is seen lying upon the shingle, in contact with a sloping bank of broken chalk. The latter being evidently the ruin of the ancient chalk cliffs, the flints it contains presenting no appearance of having suffered either from attrition or exposure. To the west of Rottingdean, the cliffs are chiefly composed of the regular chalk strata, containing, as usual, horizontal beds of siliceous nodules and veins of tabular flint. Veins of marl are also very numerous, and there is one of remarkable extent, which appears beneath the shingle and extending in a horizontal direction to within a short distance of Rottingdean. C. Tablet 5, Figure 2, reappears on the eastern bank of the landing place. See Tablet 5, Figure 3. In that portion of the cliffs we are now describing, the shingle terminates as represented in Figure 2, Tablet 5. And by a singular coincidence, a bed of flint nodules commences immediately beneath it, and pursuing a horizontal course in the chalk, resembles at a distance a continuation of that bed. It is scarcely necessary to observe that this apparent identity is a mere illusion. A bed of rounded pebbles lying upon the chalk cannot readily be mistaken for a stratum of perfect chalk flints, still occupying the cavities in which they were originally formed. On the west side of the landing place at Rottingdean, the cliff is low, and its upper part occupied by a mass of chalk rubble, analogous in some of its characters to the calcareous bed, of which it may possibly be a continuation. It is strongly marked with undulating lines of an ochraceous yellow color. The chalk on both sides of the gap is more or less disturbed, and the veins of tabular flint are broken and contorted. This is remarkably the case with those on the eastern bank. See Figure 3, Tablet 5, in which the fragments of flint are detached from each other. The beach near this place contains semi-translucent pebbles of agate and chalcedony of a bluish-gray color. These are collected by visitors, and when cut and polished are used for bracelets and other ornamental purposes. They are usually called Rottingdean pebbles. In concluding this description of the cliffs between Brighton and Rottingdean, I would observe, in the words of Mr. Webster, that it is impossible to view them without immediately perceiving that they do not owe their existence to original stratification, but are simply the section of an immense heap of fragments of chalk and flints, mixed with clay and sand, the whole having, at some distant period, been subjected to the action of water and deposited upon the solid chalk stratum. It would be unjust to close this article without acknowledging my obligations to Miss Sarah Godley of Lewes for the elegant and accurate sketches of the strata engraved in Tablet 4 and 5, and to Mr. Thomas Hodgkin of Brighton for an interesting account of the principal phenomena above described. To the kind assistance of this gentleman, whose residence near the spot afforded him every facility for accurate observation, I hold myself particularly indebted. Organic remains of the diluvial deposits. It is precisely in deposits of this kind, that is, in diluvial beds spread over the surface of plains, or accumulated in the bottoms of valleys, that the remains of quadrupeds have been discovered in various parts of England. In Sussex, however, these remains but very rarely occur, the bones and teeth of the horse and of the elephant being the only examples at present known. Mr. Hawkins informs me that about 60 years since, the bones of an elephant were dug up in Burton Park, near Arundel, but I have been unable to obtain any satisfactory account of the circumstances attending their discovery. In the brick loam at Hove, near Brighton, a fragment of a bone resembling the femur and a grinder of a large size were found at the depth of about 6 feet. The tooth was decidedly that of the Asiatic elephant. In the spring of last year at Peppering, near Arundel, the bones and several grinders of elephants were found in a bed of gravel on the estate of John Druitt, Esquire, of Peppering, who kindly favoured me with the following remarks concerning them. The remains in question were found in a bed of gravelly loam, situated near the foot of the downs, and reposing upon the chalk, at an elevation of about 80 feet above the level of the Arun. They were lying very superficially, the first fragment of bone that attracted our notice being scarcely 3 feet beneath the surface. The specimens collected consist of a tusk, 4 grinders, and several fragments of other bones, apparently portions of the skull. The body appeared to lie beneath a bank of earth of considerable thickness, and could not have been removed without much labor. The tusk was lying upon its convex part, and notwithstanding every precaution, broke into several pieces upon our attempting to remove it. It measured 4 feet and a half long, and from 22 to 24 inches in circumference. But neither the base nor point were perfect. The largest grinder of the lower jaw weighed 6 pounds 4 ounces, its upper surface being 3 inches and a half wide and 7 inches long. One of the molars of the upper jaw was broken in two, and the pieces detached from each other. The grinders and bones of the elephant and horse occur in the calcareous bed at Brighton, as previously mentioned. The antlers and bones of the red deer are said to have been discovered in a bed of loam, in sinking a well near the barracks, a mile to the northeast of Brighton. But much confidence cannot be placed in the correctness of the information. Forming a kind of breccia of a very singular appearance. A specimen of this mineral is figured in Sowerby's British Mineralogy. Have occasionally been found at the depth of 10 or 12 feet from the summit of the cliff. I am indebted to Mr. Langridge of Brighton for specimens of this substance, discovered in digging the foundation of a house on the east cliff, and of the Asiatic elephant. In the present month, April 1822, a large molar tooth of the Asiatic elephant has been discovered in Lower Rock Gardens, in a well 50 feet deep, by John Smith, Esquire, Foreign Counsel, and are more or less water-worn. I have specimens of the teeth by favour of Mr. James Berry, architect, found in a well 50 yards inland, at the depth of 46 feet, in the Coombe Rock, and immediately above a bed of shingle. The teeth are rounded by attrition, but in other respects have suffered no material change. The story of human bones having been found in the calcareous bed is too apocryphal to require notice. And these are said to be influenced by the tides. Some wells at Tetney, a village on the coast of Lincolnshire, that are sunk in the chalk are also affected by the tide, the wells overflowing with a greater flux at the time of high water, and particularly at spring tides, showing that the water in the chalk communicates with the sea. Geological Transactions, Volume 3, page 394. Invariably confined to that formation, and in no instance whatever appear either in the shingle bed or in the calcareous bed above it. An opinion having been expressed by a gentleman well known in the scientific world, the flint veins traverse not only the shingle bed, but also the calcareous deposit, and have been formed subsequently to the accumulation of an alluvial bed by the attrition of agitated water, and that the cliffs at Brighton are to be regarded as two very distinct chalk formations. I carefully repeated my examination of the strata in question, but could not discover any appearance to support such a hypothesis. See Royal Institution Journal, number 8, page 227 et sequentia. Phillips Outlines, edition 1822, page 106. Consequently, a vertical section would cut off all traces of the shingle. It was probably from want of attention to this circumstance that the respectable writer previously alluded to was led to adopt the opinion that the shingle bed was situated between two distinct beds of flinty chalk.